I'd argue that the carers movement, in a way, began with Mary Webster, who collected around her a group of people equally outraged at the disadvantage they had faced, because as women in the 60s, having given up families, because that was a choice they had to make then, if they wanted a career, they consciously opted to have careers rather than marriages and families. They then found themselves as single daughters in families entirely responsible for the care of their ageing and unwell parents. And she described caring as being in prison. She was so cut off. She'd been a Congregationalist minister. She was so cut off from the life that she'd built for herself. And this vision she had of helping people, absolutely cut off. And she was so outraged, she did what outraged professional women did. She wrote to the Times, and she had an extraordinary response. So it was rather like the 60s equivalent of trending on Twitter. She had a whole front garden filled with mailbags from people who felt the same. For her, it was a women's issue. She was a political creature, and she gathered around her people she felt could have influence, and she caught the ear of Baroness Sear in the House of Lords, and actually the Association for the Single Woman and Her Elderly Dependents, which is what Carers UK originally launched with an event in the House of Lords. Now, we're still doing that stuff now.
Caring as it evolved in most societies was seen as a woman's area of work as opposed to a man. It's not exclusively, but the vast majority of caring was done by women in all its varieties. The normal child rare caring, for example, and also in relation to illness and disability. And it was seen, but it also was seen as almost part of the culture of societies, and it also wound into the religious beliefs of societies. So it was almost like women's natural role. And that had serious implications for women in relation to their employability, in relation to their earnings, in relation to family expectations. As the level of need of the person receiving care grew, as in many, many cases it did, then the caring role took over that person's life, to the detriment of their paid work life, to the detriment of their social life quite often, and other aspects of their life. So it also left them impoverished, because in many situations, many societies had payments to give to people who were unemployed, who were of low income. So it might be means tested, but if you were unemployed and available for work, you could qualify for this unemployment, which gave you some small amount of money. In many countries, if you were not available for work, you could not get the unemployment. And carers were not available for work, because they were working more hours than the average work week anyway, which was about 40 hours a week. Many were working 80 hours a week. Some were working 100, some were on call overnight if their relative has disturbed sleep due to their illness or due to stresses that they're suffering as a result of their illness. So it very much was a gender issue. We all became more aware of the gender issue also through that same period because of the general movement in relation to women's rights, in relation to divorce, contraception, etc. So there was that supportive awareness going on there, but society was more engaged with these other issues than with carers. And creating the awareness about carers was, I suppose, one of the major tasks. And if you leapfrog forward to today and say, well, what's the issue in relation to gender now? The statistics are showing that there's much more men involved now, but it's still only a minority. And if you take the yardstick of saying, as the hours of caring required per day or per week grows, and as the complexity of carer grows, you find it's more and more higher percentage of women than men.
There's no question that there's a gendered element. There's no question that there are more women who are carers. There's been a significant shift in that over the years. But in Australia, we're a very macho culture, you know. The men are big and tough and they carry guns and they wear blue singlets and they talk rough, you know. So becoming carers is sometimes terribly threatening to that masculine identity. It's sometimes very, very difficult. We now have more and more men who understand how important that caring role is and who take it on with a great sense of pride. We make sure that amongst our carer ambassadors are some of those strong and powerful men who will tell the story about taking care of mum with dementia or looking after son with cerebral palsy or some of the things that they do on a daily basis, so that we break down the myth that caring is about women, and that we change the discourse around what is men's work and what is women's work. We must do that. In Australia, we're a very diverse group of populations. We have a lot of emerging populations, many people who've immigrated to Australia. And one of the problems we see often is that in some cultures, the caring will fall to the young women. And that it's very hard to get in to talk about that could be a shared responsibility. It means that young women are taken out of school to become carers. We're working really hard to make sure we shift that and we show role models that are about young men and older men as well as young women and older women. We see a lot of families where that responsibility is very much shared, but where the women have expressed that they are the primary carer when in fact the responsibility is shared. We think the time has come to change it.
We have the third highest percentage of women in paid employment amongst the OECD countries. And of course then it is women that are taking on board those extra responsibilities with adverse effects on their mental and physical health.
I know that caring is a gendered issue, but I do also think we need to look really seriously at the impact it has on men. Men in the workplace find it particularly difficult to disclose. They're disadvantaged in lots of different ways. There are different expectations on men in the workplace. So although that shouldn't be the case, we can argue that women should have equal responsibilities, rights in the workplace, and therefore it should be as difficult for them. It's not really. Everyone expects women to reduce their hours at some point. That might be because of the kids or men. That's really tough. They can't disclose. We work with macho London firefighters who have never told anyone in their teams that they have really significant caring responsibilities. But when they finally do disclose and come forward, they are struggling in really significant ways, and they're struggling emotionally as much as women do.